Welcome, students. We will be looking at a new or rather different budgeting method in this video, zero-based budgeting. Let's have a look. As you can see, zero-based budgeting, what happens here is that you don't, especially in contrast to incremental budgeting, where you use the previous year's numbers. In zero-based budgeting, you don't even think about it. Every year, every time you're preparing a new budget, you do it as if you're beginning your business, as if those activities you're trying to budget for, that's the time that you're really you've invented that activity, and this is the first time you're doing it. So zero base is essentially starting from a zero base. Every time you prepare a budget, you start as if you have never done budgeting before, and you want to very clearly and very properly justify your costs. That's what zero based budgeting is. The technical definition is that it is a method of budgeting that requires each cost element to be specifically justified. Every cost element has to be specifically justified as though the activities to which the budget relates were being undertaken for the first time. As though the activities were being undertaken for the first time. Without approval, the budget allowance is zero. Without approval, the budget allowance is zero. So it's a really daunting exercise actually, because every year having to do this exercise, especially if you're in a multi-million-dollar company, this is going to be quite troublesome. So one thing we note is that people don't really undertake zero-based budgeting in a regular basis, but they use it as an advantage to relook at your costs maybe once every 5 years or 10 years, because then you're taking a fresh approach and you're thinking newly, and you're seeing whether all your costs are justified. So cost justification is a big part and big thing within zero-based budgeting. It's so, as you can see, given the nature of the zero-based budgeting process, its suitability is more for fast and dynamic businesses, and it's very suitable if you have a lot of discretionary spending, advertising, marketing, that and this, because if there's a bulk of those costs can easily overrun. But what zero-based budgeting does is that it will always, every year or every time you prepare a budget, it will require a proper justification. Exactly why are we doing this? So given that the justification is provided and it is analyzed and it is accepted, what will happen is that the budget requested will be approved. So that's generally what will happen with zero-based budgeting, and how you understand zero-based budgeting suitability for businesses. In addition to this, a lot of public sector organizations also tend to use zero-based budgeting because of the nature of their work, because of the dynamic changes that always happen, within politics and within governance of a nation, and also, with respect to organizations that have funding not from a particular profit-based source. So then zero-based budgeting becomes a really worthwhile effort, because if you just keep on incrementally increasing the budget, then especially with respect to public organizations, it's public money, right? It's money, it's tax, it's different income revenue to come from the public. So we don't want to be in a situation where we are using something like incremental budgeting and be wasting that money. So that's why zero-based budgeting is quite accepted. Okay, we have a couple of things to learn about zero-based budgeting. One is the way of how it happens. How does zero-based budgeting work? It is based on mainly 3 steps. I call it 3 steps, but they have broken it down into 4. What happens is, firstly, just like in activity-based costing, you determine all the activities for which costs are aligned. You determine all the activities for which there are costs. And once you do that, all those activities, you try to come up with something called a decision package. And to give you an example, if I wanted to go from New York to Toronto, what will happen is that that's the activity, traveling from New York to Toronto. But what's the decision package? So one thing, flight. You take a flight. That is what we call a decision package. Second, you ride the bike. Number 2. Number 3, you ride the bus. Number 4, you take the train. So these 4, right, the 4 examples I mentioned in the activity of going from point A to point B, those 4 are the decision packages. Now, one thing about decision packages is that it can be either mutually exclusive or not. Now, what happens here with the traveling is that if I'm the only one to travel, then they are mutually exclusive or completely separate, right? Factors or decision packages, because you cannot be traveling in the flight and also be taking the bus and also be driving yourself at the same time. That's not possible. So you have to understand that decision packages there can be situations like that, and there can be situations otherwise where there is a mix of some of the suggestions you are making for the decision packages, and all can be done. Even in traveling, one could say no, there is actually one way where you could take a flight from point New York to Florida or somewhere, whatever, and then from Florida to uh, Toronto, you take a train or something. So there we see a mix, right? It's a mixed situation. You're taking the bus and you're taking the train, or you're taking the flight and then you're driving yourself. So that is also one way to look at it, because you can have uh, an overlap between decision packages. So at which point you have to evaluate them. So that's step 3 actually. Each decision package is evaluated and ranked using a cost benefit analysis. So cost benefit analysis is essentially looking at each of those packages, how much money do we need to spend, how much return are we gaining with regard to it, etc., etc. So once that happens, depending on your decision as to if it's if it's just one strategy that you finalized on, then you go according to that and you invest or you allocate resources necessary. But if you've actually come up with 2 or 3 or 4 decision packages that can mutually coexist, that can happen at the same time, and that can increase our revenue, then there we go. You know what to do. You would definitely consider using all of those options. So that's how zero-based budgeting works. You identify the activities. For each activity, you identify the decision packages available, the different options, and for all of those decision packages, you try to come up with a cost. Once that is done, you evaluate your decision packages and then ultimately rank them based on the response of your evaluation. Okay, so that brings me to the advantages and disadvantages. Again, I want to stress why you're learning this in this format. Advantages and disadvantages in a tabular format is because it's easy. One, on the other hand, you have to understand the suitability. You have to know which situation, which kind of business is best for us to use a zero-based budgeting. Because if you in the exam, especially if you get a scenario and there's a business and they ask you how do you actually budget, and then you go out on a limb saying zero-based budgeting, that is not going to work. You have to really make sure that the business and the details of the business that you know are well geared to accept zero-based budgeting. So you can go through the table. There's a few important points. Some of them are quite common and easy to remember. And that marks the end of this video about zero-based budgeting. I will see you in a different video. Thank you so much.